Okay. So we are up and running. We are beginning again this course, which started last year, went through a full cycle, and now we're starting up again at first principles. So this course is designed for people that are interested in Judaism, designed for people who are Jewish but are still learning, and designed for people who might be considering Judaism as a conversion path. And as such, we're going to cover a lot of things. There we go. All right, so everyone is welcome. The classes, as you can see, are held Thursday night, 6 p.m. If you can't make it, let me know, and definitely keep up with it online. The class will be canceled if there is a Jewish or secular holiday on Thursday. So Thanksgiving, for example, no class on Thanksgiving. But otherwise, we keep chugging along. Want to make sure we have that consistency. And if you haven't already, please make sure you sign up on the website. If the website isn't working, just call the office. We just need to make sure we got your name and your email address. So if there's any updates, changes of schedule, that kind of stuff, I can let you know. Why are you taking forever to switch? Okay. So for those that are interested in conversion, there is an additional bit of information to consider. So you need to, in addition to coming to the class, you need to come to services. Friday and Saturday night we have service, or Friday night and Saturday morning we have services. You don't need to be there every service, but the more you come, the more you will get out of it. The quicker you will become comfortable, and the quicker you'll become part of the community. So it is something to definitely set as a goal. You need to be reading the weekly Torah portion on your own. If you don't know where the Torah portion is, don't worry. We make that available through our Facebook feed. We also do it through our emails. And of course, you can check out, we'll talk about in a second, a great website called hebcal.com, and that will always get you the right answer. You should also, during the course of this, these lessons and these classes, begin to practice some of what we go over. Tonight, there's not a whole lot of practical Jewish commandments, but over other weeks, you'll find things about Shabbat, about keeping kosher, about ethics, that you can begin to integrate into your life. Don't wait until the very end to make it real. You should also be beginning to attend social or cultural Jewish events in the broader community. Here as well, you know, we have a bus trip coming up to go down to South Florida. That sort of thing is a great way to meet people and see more than the formal study and formal service setting. It's also a good way in the broader community to connect with Jews that are part of the overall Orlando life. And that's an important aspect of belonging and feeling connected. And you should also be beginning to learn Hebrew. You can do this on your own, which is a little harder. You can take a class. We do happen to offer classes here on Sunday mornings, but there are other classes available online and in the community as well if you look around, if the Sunday doesn't work. Good. Later on in the year of these courses, we'll talk about how conversion physically actually works. But this is what you should have in mind from this point forward. By the way, I should point out, anytime you have a question while I'm talking, just let me know. I like questions, and it does help me know whether students are getting what they need to be getting from the information. Okay, Judaism likes books. Sitting here in a library, and you can see we've got a few books. This isn't even a big library. But books are important because books contain knowledge, and books contain the record of those who have come before us, and therefore we can stand on their shoulders. There are a few books that you should definitely get, and then there are an infinite number of books that it's a good idea to get. So on the screen is a list of books that should be at the top of the shopping list. So the Tanakh, you got to start there. Right? The Tanakh is the Bible. It's the Hebrew word for Bible. We'll talk more about Tanakh study later, but not tonight, but later on. So it stands for Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the Torah, the prophets, and the writings, the three divisions of the way we categorize the books of the Bible. And the Tanakh has to be on your bookshelf somewhere. The Siddur, this is the Jewish prayer book. Now there are many different varieties of Siddurim, most of which have mostly the same content. Some of them will have computer trouble. Okay, let's go back. Come on. Don't know why you did that, but let's just get back into the swing. Come on. I know that sending a picture to the TV is hard. Okay, so many different varieties of the Siddur. You can get some that have additional Hebrew help for pronunciation. You can get some that have additional translation help. You can get some that have additional commentary. You can get ones that have different commentary of different types. So getting a Siddur is a start. You may end up with more than one Siddur over the course of study. We use the Siddur known as Lev Shalem, which is the Siddur put out by the conservative movement. That is available, I believe, through order from our office. We can probably get it a little bit less expensive than if you order it directly. Check with them and we'll see what we have in terms of supplies. It's nice because it has great commentary and explanation of the content of the prayer, which is a big help when trying to engage with why are we saying these words, which will be another class. The Observant Life should also be up on the top of your list. The Observant Life is a book also put out by the conservative movement, which is a nice big fat, although you can get it electronically too, compendium of different essays on different aspects of Jewish living. So it'll have the why we do things for all of the holidays, for the major sections of our prayer, for the issues of Shabbat and the issues of kashrut, the issues of business ethics, the issues of civics ethics, family relations. All of these things are contained in this one nice big fat book, and which is on the whole well written. It's written by different contributors and then edited together. And it is a great resource for just wanting to read more about any given topic. And it's nice because you can just open to the topic you want. You don't have to read it per page one and then linearly through. The Jewish Home Advisor is a similar book, but it cuts to the chase of what do I need to do for hanging a mezuzah? What do I need to do for wearing a talit? What do I need to do for keeping Shabbat? It gives very brief and very, what's the right word, limited opinions. So the Observant Life will give you more of there are some who say this and some who say that. The Jewish Home Advisor tends to streamline everything into one version, which is sometimes good because sometimes you just want a quick answer and sometimes it's limiting, and that's why you need other resources to go with it. You can't really understand Judaism without understanding our history. We will cover some of that during our courses, but this is not the substitute for a full history book. And a good version to start with is A History of the Jews by Paul Johnson. It is a comprehensive one-volume history, which is hard to do because there are about 3,000 years of Jewish history. And that tends to take up a lot of pages if you want to give it any sort of comprehensive treatment. This is a good start and one that will get you going. If history is still intimidating to you, and you'll want to get over that intimidation eventually, but if it's still uncomfortable with history, there is a good book out there called The Jewish History for Dummies. Don't be insulted. It's a nicely put together, much thinner Jewish history, but it covers the high points in a way that can at least get you the feel for the grand scheme of Jewish history, the big arc of history. So if you're not ready to sit down and curl up with a 700-page history book, that's a nice step in the middle. Or if you just want to go back and refresh your memory on some parts of Jewish history, the book for dummies is not bad. Once you get into Jewish history, however, at some point you're going to say, oh, I really love this period of history. I really want to know more about this person. And that there are literally thousands of books that go into more detail on every different aspect of Jewish history. So once you find your passion, you'll find more books to help you there, and movies and internet sites and everything. The Commentator's Bible is a great resource that was absolutely invaluable until about 2-3 years ago. Now it's not quite as invaluable. It's still a great resource to have for people who love books. The Commentator's Bible is a copy of the Torah that has the Torah text in the middle with translation, and around it are commentaries. Well, what's special about this is they did the commentaries in English. So for people that are not fluent in Hebrew, which is most people who would come to this class, this is very, very helpful. and it is the traditional means by which we study Torah. If you look in a traditional Jewish library, you see exactly that in Hebrew, where you have the Torah with all the different commentators, often arguing with each other, all around that text. The Commentator's Bible did a great job of translating that into English. Nowadays, as we see when we get to the websites, there is a website that does that job very, very well. So if you are not completely dedicated to having a book and are okay with studying online, you can hold off on buying those, because those are volumes of books. There's like one for each book of the Torah, and they run between 50 and 60 bucks each. So that's a heavy investment, and there are other things you might want to invest in first, but in the long term, it's nice to have the paper. It's even better to learn the Hebrew, and then you can buy even more commentaries, and they're a lot cheaper when they're in the original Hebrew because there's no copyright. All right. Back to the Sources is another book I can highly recommend. Back to the Sources is a great book for teaching you how to read Jewish books, which might sound like a little bit of a weird book, but Jewish books are written in a particular style, and those styles changed over the 3,000 years that we've been writing. So when you read the Torah, I keep pointing to the Chumash here, when you read the Torah, it is a foreign book. Even if you were born and raised in Judaism, you're reading a book that was written by a culture that has been 3,000 years gone, 3,000 years of change and adaptation, not vanished, obviously we're still here, but the culture they lived in, the farming, the expectations of what a family was and what a family would do, many of those assumptions and much of the language, the idiom, is no longer obvious to us. And so Back to the Sources is a great way to help you understand how to understand that book, and then how to understand the other great books of Jewish history, the Midrash, the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Zohar, and many more. And if you don't know what those books are, that's why you're here in this class. We will cover that. And then the Jewish Holidays, a guide and commentary. One of the great features of Jewish life is the Jewish calendar. And the Jewish calendar is chock full of holidays. We have lots and lots of special days. And each day has a special flavor and a special feeling and a special ideology and history and all of these things that go with it, as well as all the rituals and customs. And it can be a little overwhelming if you don't know where to go for advice. The Jewish Holidays, a guide and commentary, is a great one-volume book where a few weeks before each holiday comes around, you just open up that chapter, you read through it, and okay, so that's what we do for Sukkot. So that's what we do for Hanukkah. And then, of course, there's always more to learn beyond that, but it gives you a nice grounding. Good?
Also, these books, I can find them on a website, venture.
Absolutely. So you can find all of these books on Amazon.com, okay. Which is one of the greatest booksellers in the world, because they sell every book. There are not really that many Jewish bookstores in this area. If you go down to South Florida, there are more. The Boca Raton, Miami area, there are more Jewish bookstores that you can walk into, and it's lovely and amazing, and the smell of books is just beautiful. But that's not usually an option here in Florida. As I mentioned before, the Siddur and the Tanakh, if you want the Etz Chaim Chumash, which is not the full Tanakh, but it's just the Torah and the parts of the prophets we read in the services, that we can help you order through the office. But for the other books, you're going to want to look online. If you're interested in some suggestions of which Tanakh to get and that sort of thing, send me an email and I'll give you some recommendations. But most of them are all good to start with, and you'll end up with more than one copy, I promise. Okay. Online, we are living in an age of treasures. We are living in a Renaissance age of Jewish learning, because the internet has put all of these lovely resources into everybody's home or onto everyone's phone. And so you can have a library here that would have cost an entire family salary for a year by just downloading a free app. It's amazing. Foremost among these websites that you need to make sure you're clicked into are Sefaria.org and Hebcal.com. These are the two you gotta have. Right? Sefaria.org is the best online resource for classic Jewish texts. So you're not going to find modern books. You're not going to find Observant Life. You're not going to find Jewish Home Advisor, those types of things. But as far as the Torah goes, it's there. It's there in Hebrew, and it's there with multiple translations that you can choose from, because sometimes different translations will help you get a better feel. And the beautiful part of it is the commentary, which is to say, any book you open, on the side, there will be a list of the different commentary or connections from that book to other books. And that is where the magic happens. So you are looking at a section of Genesis, which is what we're reading now, and you're reading about the burial of Sarah, and it talks about the cave of Machpelah, which is the place where she is buried. And if you look over on the side, it'll tell you where else that area is talked about in the Tanakh. It'll tell you where else it's talked about in rabbinic literature. It'll tell you what some of the different laws are, or where the laws have talked about for burial. It takes you to all those other places. Now, not everything has been translated yet, but a lot of it has. And most of the primary material has. So you still would need Hebrew to get to the secondary level, but most of the primary level material has been translated. So even if your Hebrew is not great, you can still do a lot. So highly, highly recommend that website. It's one of the best things that's happened in the last 5 years in the Jewish internet. Hebcal.com is older, and it has one job and one job only, and it does that job beautifully. It runs the Hebrew calendar. That is to say, you go onto it, it'll tell you what the Hebrew date is, it'll tell you what holiday it is, it'll tell you what the Torah portion is, it'll tell you what the Haftarah is, and it'll let you even run a calendar so that you can spit out all the holidays for the rest of the year. Or you can even find out what your birthday is in the Hebrew calendar and things like that. So it handles the calendar, and that's all it does. And both of these sites are great as well because they are free sites. There's no subscription needed, and there aren't even any ads. It's just lovely. Other study sites, the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, which is where I studied, is in Los Angeles. That's a rabbinic school, and they have a lot of learning information online. So too does the Jewish Theological Seminary, which is the rabbinic school in New York. They also have a lot of their classes and information online. Great resources. Check them out from time to time. There are many, 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 many other resources, and this is just going to be a quick run through of the different ones. So there is the Seminario Rabbinico Latinoamericano, which is the seminary in Buenos Aires. So all three of those, the Ziegler School, JTS, and the Seminario, are part of the conservative movement, our movement of Judaism. And the nice thing about the Seminario is if you are a Spanish native speaker, they have Spanish resources as well. The conservative movement also has what's known as the Rabbinical Assembly. This is sort of the guild of conservative rabbis, and there are a lot of materials online and also some books that can only be purchased through them. So it is also a very good resource. My Jewish Learning and Judaism 101 are two of the earliest and still most complete neutral Jewish learning sites. They don't have a political axe to grind. They don't have a particular movement that they are behind. There's no ulterior motive. They just give you the straight information. Now, they're not perfect. They're not, 100% complete in all information because, you just can't write everything. But they are both great first-level resources to go to for additional information. And so is Wikipedia. I know a lot of people badmouth Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a great Jewish resource. There is mostly good information, not all of it complete again, but most of it is accurate. And it is also a good place to go if you want to see how things connect to each other. So highly recommend it. If, again, you are a Spanish native speaker, there is a site for Kol Tuv. Kol Tuv is a Spanish Hebrew Siddur with Spanish transliteration. That's Spanish pronunciation help for the Hebrew. And it's the site where, it's the Siddur that we use for our Latino Shabbat. So if you are looking to get your own copy, you can download the PDF from them, and then you've got your own copy good to go. Okay? Okay, and online booksellers, as I mentioned, Amazon is just amazing. But Nahora.com, MySafer.com, and SfarimCenter.com, all three of these are great resources. Many of them also have multiple languages or editions in different languages. And this is where to go to get beyond the basic books. So you fall in love with Rashi, we'll talk about him. You fall in love with Halakha, Jewish law. This is where you go to get your next level of Jewish learning. You're not going to find many of the primary books that I already mentioned there, except for the Siddur and the Tanakh, but you will find the books that you'll come to want eventually. So it's good to know where they are. Okay, so any questions about sort of the framework of the class, how we're getting going, and some of the resources? Okay, then let's get down to the first meat of the lesson, or the first lesson's meat, I guess would be the best phrase. So before we get into all the nuts and bolts of how to live a Jewish life, there are a few things that we need to discuss about what Jews actually believe. And this is a good framework to keep in mind when we're going through everything else, because it's very easy to get lost or even sometimes overwhelmed by all of the do's and don'ts of Judaism, by all of the history of Judaism, and by all of the different ideas of Judaism. And sometimes it's like, whoa, wait a minute, what is this, a religion or a college course? So remembering these 13 principles is a good way to keep in mind why we're doing what we're doing and how it all fits together at a basic level. Now, these 13 principles are not law. That is to say, people sometimes still disagree about them. They were written 1,100 years ago or 1,000 years ago by a man named Rambam, Rabbi Moses ben Maimon, also known as Maimonides. And as soon as he wrote them, people began arguing about them. And this was his attempt, though, to try and put together a simple summary of Jewish belief. It's not meant to be the end, but the beginning of understanding what Jews believe. And he started a great conversation that's still going. So let's join the conversation and see how it goes. But note that as we go through them, there is room for multiple interpretations of most of these. And I have had to abridge some of them just to make them fit for tonight's class. The full examples that he gives are slightly longer in many cases, but I've kept the essence of what his points are. Okay, the first principle, number one. There are 13 of these, so you'll just have to hold on. So the first principle, to believe in the existence of the Creator and that there is a being in all, complete in all ways of existence. That's what we call God. Right? A lot of people use the term God, and they have no idea what they actually mean by the word God. They mean Superman, but invisible, or they mean their big friendly ghost buddy that helps them. They don't actually understand what God is. And what Rambam is saying is that when we say we believe in God, we have to know what we mean when we say we believe in God, or else we're not believing in God. We're just believing in whatever we made up. And he has some very particular points. We'll go into more detail about this another time. But just for the beginning, this is what he says. The Creator is, the God is the Creator, right? All of existence doesn't just mean this planet, but the universe, time, space, everything created by God, right? God is totally outside of the universe. That's why he's able to make it. And God is complete in all ways of existence. What that means is that God is not made up of pieces. God is not put together from other things, and God is not lacking in any way, shape, or form. And that is unique. Everything else in existence, all of us are deficient in some way, right? Even if it's just because we're made up of pieces, that still makes us able to be broken and have problems. God, no, right? God is totally different than us. God is the cause of the existence of all things and of all other things in existence, meaning if there was no God, there would be no Rabbi Neely. There would be no chair. There would be no air. There would be no sun. Right? Without God, nothing else could exist. Through him does their existence survive, and from him is their survival. And one cannot imagine the lack of his existence, since in the lack of his existence, the existence of all things dissolves, and no thing's existence would survive. Right. They might be able to guess, Rambam was a philosopher. And so he writes complicated sentences because these are complicated ideas, but it can still take a little while to untangle. That's not a problem. So what he's saying here is that if you truly could imagine God not existing, then the thing you're imagining isn't actually God. Right? That's a quick test for, do I understand God? It's like, could I imagine just going boom, and unplugging God from reality, and reality still going along. And if the answer is, yeah, I can imagine that, then the thing you're unplugging, the thing that you're imagining as God, is incorrect, right? That you're mistaken. Because if you truly understood what God was, you could not understand the absence of God. That would just not make sense. Does that make sense? Okay. He goes on. And if we were to imagine the lack of all other things in existence besides him, the existence of God would not dissolve and not be diminished. Right? So that's the reverse, which is to say, I'm imagining God and I'm imagining the universe. And if all of the universe went and disappeared, would God still be there? Would God still be perfect? And if I can say yes, then I'm doing right. It's that someone showing up really early for the meeting at 7? Just a second. Hey.
This is a class? Or?
This is a class, yeah, but the meeting's at 7, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Oh, you're welcome to come in. Yeah, this is the Pathway to Judaism class. So it's sort of an intro to Judaism, and we're actually the first day today. So again, if you can imagine the universe disappearing, but God continues to exist, then you're on the right track to understanding God. That God is not dependent on the universe, but the universe is dependent on God. Unity and majesty only belong to God. May his name be blessed. Since he suffices in his existence, that means God is good enough to exist all by himself. Nothing else is. Everything else is dependent on something. God dependent on nothing. It is enough for him to be by himself, and he doesn't need the existence of anything else. And this is the first principle, and it is indicated by the first commandment, I am the Lord your God, which is from the book of Exodus. Pretty clear on that one? Good. It gets a little more complicated. Part 2, second principle, the unity of God, which is to say that we believe that he who is the cause of everything, that concept that we're dealing with, is one. Now this one is a special type of one, right? And he is not like one of a pair, or not like one of a group, and not like one person that can be divided into many smaller units, and is not like a simple body which is numerically one, but can be infinitely divided. So what is Rambam saying here? He's saying, if I say I have one binder, I'm not saying anything about the other binders around, or anything special about this binder. I'm just counting. When we say God is one, or there is one God, we are making a different statement. We are saying that which is God can only be one. If there was an equal number 2, then whatever we're imagining isn't God. Right? We've got something else stuck in our head, and it's not God. God can only be one. And God is indivisible. Right? If you can imagine God with his hand over here and his eye over there and his toes over there, what you're imagining? Not God. Right? It might be poetry, and poetry can sometimes be helpful, but sometimes confusing and misleading. But it's not actually God. It is an error. Excuse me. Rather, he, God, may he be blessed, is one in a unity that has no unity like it. And this is the second principle, and is indicated by that which is stated, Shema Yisrael, listen Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one, which is taken from the book of Deuteronomy, and which we recite twice a day, as well as a few other bonus times during the day, as the reminder of this great principle. Good?
That's the Shema?
That's the Shema, exactly. Third principle, denial of his physicality, and that is, we believe that his unity that we have mentioned is not a body, and not the power of a body, and that the actions of a body do not relate to him, not in his essence, and not in his doing. God doesn't have a body, right? No actual hands, no feet, no eyes, no spaghetti monster, right? God is not a thing, and God cannot be a thing. Right, which is a very important principle, and one that can often get people hung up. Because a lot of people have been taught, I don't know if taught, a lot of people have had it drilled into them that God can do everything, right? But God can't do something which would undermine his own godness, right? Which would take away his divinity, because then he wouldn't be God. And God can't cancel himself out, right? God doesn't get to stop being God for a day. It's a full-time job. And part of being God is not having a body. And therefore, God can no longer stop being God and have a body any more than I could make a circle into a square. Because as soon as I make it into a square, It's not a circle anymore. So this is a very important point. As the sages say, may their memories be blessed, they denied his composition and dissolution and said, and the prophet said, this is from Isaiah, and to whom do you compare me, and I be equated, says the Holy. Meaning, there is nothing like God. Everything else in the universe has a body, has stuff. God cannot be compared. He is incomparable to everything else. Were he a body, he would be comparable to other bodies. And everything that comes in the Holy Scriptures that describes him in physical ways, such as God walking, or God standing, or sitting, or speaking, or similar to it, is all by way of metaphor. So when it says God took us out with a mighty hand, that doesn't mean God has a hand. It means that we humans have a certain poetry when we try to describe some things. When we say God was walking through the Garden of Eden, that doesn't mean God was going footstep, footstep, footstep. It just means that God's presence was felt by Adam and Eve at that point, and everything that happened after that. And so did the rabbis say, the Torah speaks in the language of people, right? The Torah was written for people to understand. It wasn't written as a precise philosophy textbook that only people who had studied for 50 years would be able to connect to. It was written in a way that you can connect to when you're in kindergarten, and that you can connect to after you've been studying for 50 years. And that is one of the beauties of Torah, is that it grows with us, or more specifically, our understanding of it grows, and we can begin to see more and more depth than we did when we were only 5 years old. And this third principle is indicated by that which is stated from Deuteronomy, for you did not see any image, which is to say, you did not perceive him as something with an image. This was back with the giving of the Ten Commandments. Because he is, as we have mentioned, not a body and not the power of a body. Good. So far, we are still in basic philosophy land. That is to say, up to this point, if you were to talk to Aristotle or Socrates about the prime cause of all of existence, so far they would be in agreement with us. We haven't actually gotten to the uniquely Jewish stuff yet, but we need this to get there. Fourth principle, which is also philosophy, pre-existence, and that is that we believe that his unity that we mentioned is absolutely pre-existing, and that no other existing thing besides him was pre-existing in relation to him. Meaning, before everything, God was there. After everything, God will still be there. There wasn't anything else around with God before God got busy creating. Right? God didn't have a partner. God didn't have any assistants. Any assistants that when we get into talk about angels that we might discuss, those were made by God. They were not along with God pre-existing. Right? They are absolutely way down below on that ladder of existence. And the proofs to this in the Holy Scriptures are many, and this is indicated by that which is stated in Deuteronomy, the abode of the pre-existing God. Make sense? Okay. Okay. Get to 5, and now we introduce religion. We still haven't gotten to Judaism yet, but Rambam begins to say, okay, because of all of this, the 5th principle is that he is the one that is fitting to serve and to exalt and to make his greatness known and to do his mitzvot, his commandments, and not to do this to that which is below him in existence, from the angels and the stars and the spheres and the elements and that which is composed of them. So what is he saying? He is saying, because we now understand what God is, then God and only God should be what we worship, should be what we turn to for guidance, for the commandments of how we should live our life. Right? Everything else is below, so why would I listen to it? Right? Why would I care where Jupiter is, in the night sky and do astrology? Why would I, cast chicken bones to find my fortune? There's God, and why do I need a statue? There's no point. Right? Everything else is below. And that means I should only be focused on God for the guidance of how I'm supposed to live. Make sense? Right. And they, meaning all of these other things, are all designed, and there is no judgment and no free choice in their actions. Only to him may he be blessed. Right? Angels don't get to make decisions. Right? They're not even vice presidents. They are just functionaries. They are just basic enactments of God's will. And so why would I pray to the Archangel Michael or something like that? No, and all the more so to, idols like Zeus and Jupiter and those other things that people made up. It is not fitting to serve them in order that they be intermediaries to bring them closer to him, but rather to him alone should they direct their thoughts and leave everything besides him. And this fifth principle is that idolatry, the worship of others, things other than God, is prohibited. And most of the Torah prohibits this. And what he means by that is not that some of it doesn't, but that if you read the Torah, not quite every page, but almost every page makes it pretty clear that idolatry is not a good idea. It's kind of a running plot, if you will. All right. Now, we get to the bridge between that idea that God is that which should be worshipped to God actually wants something from us. Because at the moment, we have almost like a king that lives on a high mountain that is amazing and better than all of us and so just wonderful that we should absolutely sing about how great he is. But does the king care about us? Right? Is it a one-way street or is it a two-way street? And this is where Rambam adds that it's a two-way street, right? Because we have this concept called prophecy. And that is that a person should know that among the human species, that's all of us, there is found those that naturally have highly elevated character traits and great wholeness, and their souls become fit until they receive the form of the intellect. The intellect, in Rambam's term, was the deep understanding of God, being on God's wavelength, if you will. And what he is saying is that God is emanating from God's existence into our reality, and if you are tuned in right, then you get a clear picture of what you are supposed to do. And the people who are tuned in best, we call them prophets. And they are able to relay that wavelength to the rest of us. Afterwards, that human intellect clings to the active intellect, and it emanates lofty emanations to him. And these are the prophets, and this prophecy, and this is prophecy, and this is its understanding. And the verses of the Torah testify to the prophecy of many prophets, right? The Torah doesn't just talk about Moses, although we're going to get to him in a second. The Torah talks about there being plenty of prophets, not only for us, but also for other people around the world. Judaism has no problem with the idea that there are other prophets who are trying to guide other people in the world. It's just for us. After we get done with Moses, we don't have any other prophets who can make commandments for us. We've got prophets that can guide us, or we had prophets that could guide us, but none that surpassed Moses, and therefore none that can give additional commandments. Which brings us to Moses, also known as Moshe, which is the Hebrew word for Moses. And this is where we finally turn uniquely Jewish. Right? Up to this point, everything from 1 through 6 could be believed by someone whether they're Jewish or not. To get into the Jewish beliefs, we have to start off with the guy that started it all. And that guy is Moses. So we believe the prophecy of Moses, our teacher, and that we believe that he was the father of all the prophets that were before him and that arose after him. Okay. Interesting sentence there, right? How can Moses be the father of the prophets that were before him? That's not the way fatherhood usually works, right? I can't be my father's father because then I'd be my own grandfather. But what he's talking about here is that what Moses saw was the superior version of everything else that every other prophet drew from. It's like saying that Moses was the guy closest to the picture, and everyone else who was looking at the same picture, they all got an inferior view. So what Moses gives us as his record of the picture, the Torah, is the best record of that picture. Make sense? Okay. So all are below him, and he is the chosen one from the entire human species. He grasped more of his knowledge, meaning God's knowledge, than any man who lived, and more than any man who will live. And the illusory and physical powers and their perceptions disappeared from him, and the power of arousal and desire were separated from him, and he remained only intellect. Meaning, when Moses said, "This is what I've seen of God," you could trust it because he wasn't saying it for his own self-betterment. He wasn't saying it because he was angry. He wasn't saying it because he was jealous. He wasn't saying it because he wanted a new car. He had set himself aside so that he would only transmit as cleanly and clearly as humanly possible what God wanted from us as the Jewish people. And that is something that no one else before or ever or after was able to achieve. Even the other great prophets of the Tanakh, they always had themselves as mixed in with the message that God was giving, because they weren't Moses. That's not, they were still better than me, but they were not as good as Moses in that way. And about this matter, it is stated about him that he would speak with God without an angelic intermediary. This is why the record of Moses, the Torah that we have, is considered to be the only source of commandedness. Sorry, just making sure that that's not. So that's why this is the only source of commandedness. So we don't get our commandments from any other part of the Bible. We only get our commandments from the Torah itself. Make sense? Good. Rolling along. 7.2. You can see this is a big one, and that means it's got multiple paragraphs. The prophecy of Moshe, our teacher, is distinct from the prophecy of all other prophets in 4 ways. First, the first one is that any prophet that existed was only spoken to God through an intermediary, meaning all the other prophets, Abraham, Isaiah, Elijah, Ezekiel, all those other guys, when they were talking with God, they were actually experiencing God through some intermediary form, some angelic, some divine lens of translation from God to the human realm. They were not getting the one-to-one in the meeting room with God and only God. The second matter is related, is that any other prophet would not get prophecy except when he was sleeping, as it is stated in many places, in a dream at night, in an apparition during the night or day, after the falling into a trance in such a way that all of his feelings disappear from him and his thought becomes fully available, like in the matter of a dream. This is, again, going back to the idea that the prophet, to do prophecy, kind of has to shut down himself, shut down his own voice to be able to only hear God's voice. And for most prophets, meaning everyone but Moses, the only way they could really do that was to be asleep or to be in like a daze, so that their own self-voice would be quieted and not overmixed too much with what God was trying to relay. And part 3, the third matter that was a difference is that when a prophecy comes to another prophet, even though it is in a vision and through an angel, his power weakens and his frame shrinks, and a very great fear comes upon him that his spirit almost leaves him, as it is said in Daniel 10, verses 8 to 16. Meaning prophecy for most humans is a pretty traumatic event. We also saw this when the Israelites were standing at Mount Sinai and God was reaching out to them, and they went, oh yeah, overload. Moses, you go talk. We can't handle this. And even the prophets who could handle it still felt shaken by the experience. And the fourth matter is that the spirit of prophecy did not rest upon all the other prophets according to their will, meaning they couldn't ring up God on the telephone and say, hey, I need to talk to you, but only according to the will of God. May he be blessed, meaning when God wanted it, it happened. When God didn't want it, it didn't happen. But, and behold, it would happen that a prophet would remain for days or years and not receive prophecy. Right? They get a couple phrases, and then they go quiet for a while. That's because it's up to God of whether or not they need to speak at that time. 8th principle, which I tried to put all on one page for some reason. The 8th principle, which is based off this idea of Moses' prophecy, is linked to that, is that the Torah is from heaven. And is that we believe that this Torah, meaning the Torah we've still got and the one that's in our ark, that is given to us through Moshe, our teacher, is completely from the mouth of the Almighty, which is to say that it all came to him from God in a manner that is metaphorically called speech. So yeah, God wasn't dictating and Moses was writing it down, but the Torah that we have is the exact Torah God wants us to have. There's no part of the Torah that was just somebody thought it was a good idea. It's there because God wants it to be there. And we'll come back in later classes to talk about the different models that could take place for that to happen. But this basic principle that the entirety of the Torah is sacred is there, whether you believe the Torah was written all at once, whether you believe the Torah was written over many years, or whether you believe that different people even held the pen. The basic principle that the Torah is intact, what God wants us to have, is a very important principle of Judaism. And no one knows how it came to him except Moshe himself, peace be upon him, since it came to him. And that he was like a scribe who was dictated, and he writes down all the events and the stories in the mitzvot, meaning he didn't add anything of his own design. right? And there is no difference between and the sons of Ham were Cush and Mitzrayim, and I am the Lord your God, which is there's no difference between a boring verse and a really, really important verse. That those were all the verses that God wanted us to get, from the boring to the exalted, since they're all from the mouth of the Almighty, and it is all the Torah of God, complete, pure, and holy truth. Every single word of the Torah contains wisdom and wonders for the one who understands them. That's why we study. They accepted understanding the Torah is also from the Almighty. And that which we today make a certain form for Sukkah, the lulav, the shofar, the tzitzit, the tefillin, etc., is the exact form that God said to Moshe and which Moshe told us, and he is reliable in this charge. We will talk about this over the next couple of weeks, what we call the written Torah and the oral Torah, meaning how do you know how to do the things that are written down? There has to be an additional layer of instruction, and that's what Rambam is talking about, and that's what Judaism continues to believe. And the statement that indicates this principle is that which is stated in Numbers 16, with this shall you know that it is the Lord who sent me to do all these acts, and it is not from my heart, meaning Moses didn't make any of it up. Okay, the rest of these are much shorter. Ninth principle, faithful transmission, meaning that this is the Torah that has been faithfully transmitted from the Creator, God, and not from anyone else. And so it cannot be added to, and it cannot be taken away from, right? We don't get to add, we don't get to write new things in the Torah, and we don't get to cut anything out of the Torah. What we've got is complete. As it says in Deuteronomy 13, you shall not add to it, and you shall not take away from it. And we have already elucidated this principle in the introduction to this composition in another part of his writings. 10, the 10th principle. God knows the actions of people, right? So this is where we get to, so why does it matter? Right, so far we had, there was God. God is this amazing thing, totally different from us. God is known to us, and God should be the only object of our worship. And God has made known to us certain commandments and certain ideas of what we should do, and we can trust it with this whole idea of the transmission. But what happens if we don't? Right? What happens if we don't pay attention? What happens if we don't listen? What happens if we ignore it? What happens if we go, do something bad? This is where we begin to show that that God cares about what we do. Right? God didn't just give the book and walk away. God cares about what happens after that. So God does not ignore the actions of people. He knows them. Not like the opinion of one that has said, the Lord abandoned the earth, which was a common philosopher's opinion during Rambam's time, but rather as it is said in Jeremiah, great of counsel and mighty of works, as your eyes are open upon all the ways of people, and so on from that verse, meaning God pays attention. And the Lord saw that the evil of man was mighty upon the earth, from Genesis, and also in Genesis 18, the yelling of Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was mighty, meaning God pays attention to what goes on earth. He knows it, and he cares. Good? Which means you shouldn't be surprised by principle number 11, which is God rewards, gives reward to the one who does the commandments, who does good, and he punishes those who transgress the prohibitions and the ones who do bad. And that the great reward is the world to come, which is the Jewish phrase for the afterlife, and that the strong punishment is being cut off, which is the idea of your spirit basically being cut from God and left to be nothing, oblivion, if you will. And that there are ultimately consequences. Now, as we go through the different parts of Jewish thought and Jewish holidays, we'll talk about how we make sure that we maintain a balance, because God is not a one mistake and you're out kind of guy. So when we get to that, we will come around to how this works. 12th principle, Mashiach, the Messianic era. We believe that there is a Messianic era, and that we have a belief that we should believe and to confirm that he, meaning the Messiah, the one that will bring redemption, will come eventually. And we should not think that he is late. Right? It's not that he is late to the party. It's just apparently the party was scheduled for some time other than we thought. If he tarries, meaning if the Messiah takes a little while, we wait for him, and we do not give him a set time and do not create analyses from the verses to extrapolate the time of his coming. So many people don't get this idea, and they say, oh, I was reading in the book of Daniel, or I was reading this verse of Jeremiah, and it makes me think that if you take this number and you times it by this number and you skip to this, that you can tell the Messiah will be coming in another 50 years or on January 4th or what. It's like, guys, don't. Right? It'll happen when it happens. And in the meantime, don't say it is late. Just get on with doing what you're supposed to be doing, with living the life you're supposed to live. All right? And we should believe that he will have great advantage and stature and honor above all the kings that ever were, according to that which all the prophets prophesied about him, from Moshe to Malachi. Right? When the Messiah comes, it will be obvious who he is. Right? It will not take a whole lot of convincing. Everyone will go, yeah, that guy, the way he explains, the way he teaches, the way he leads, that's the guy. This is not going to be a question of doubt. And one who does doubt him and for whom his stature is diminished denies the Torah. So if you are saying, the Messiah will probably be some, nobody, that's not the right way to be looking at this. And the Torah testifies about him in the Parashat Bilam, Parashat Atem Nitzavim, and included in this principle is that there should not be a king in Israel except from the house of David, who we believe the Messiah will come from, and one who disputes this family denies the name of God and the words of his prophets. The prophets have made it very clear that Mashiach will come through the house of David. All right, and last, but definitely not least, even though it is the shortest of the list, is the 13th principle, the revival of the dead. Right? We have already elucidated it, meaning Rambam has talked about it elsewhere, which is to say that when a person believes in all these principles and his faith in them is clarified, he enters into the category of Israel. And according to other teachings, those that are in that position after death, there will be a time for a rebirth, for a second life, for what we call mechaye metim, the resurrection of the dead, which we will go over in more detail when we talk about the end of days and eschatology and other types of things. But you should know that that has never been the focus of Judaism. Although it is an important principle, it is not our goal. Judaism is designed to help us live in this life and to accomplish what we can in this life, which is totally different than what we do in the next life. And therefore, we don't waste our time here worrying about that over much. It's important to know, but it's not our focus. Okay, so 1 to 13. Quick run through. Any questions? Okay, then we will leave it here for tonight. We will be meeting again next Thursday. And as I mentioned, I think before you came, we won't be having class on like Thanksgiving or other holiday type things. But otherwise, it'll be there. You can always check the website make sure that it's on the calendar. Or you can always email me if you're not sure. Okay, good.
You.
See you next week, 6 o'clock sharp.
Yes, I will try to be here on time. Yeah.
Well, it's not for me, but